Welcome back, everybody. It is 2:54 p.m., October 6, 2017. That is Eastern Time. All right off the bat, I need to tell you guys about the new hurricane warnings. They have gone from hurricane watches to warnings, which means it's likely these areas will at least get hurricane force winds, storm surge, and rain. So that is very important to point out. We're talking about areas basically from the entire Chandler Sound all the way east, almost to the Santa Rosa Island in the panhandle of Florida. You can see right here is where that cutoff is for the hurricane warnings. Now, I want to point something else out. We are shifting east, guys. If you notice in the spaghetti plots now, we've been talking about this for a few days. We expected this to happen, and it looks more than likely that this is what's going to happen now. Nate is projected to now shoot the gap in between these two land masses. It was projected to pass over Cancun, which may have slowed the storm down, weaken it a bit, and not allow it to gain a lot of strength before heading towards the coast. But now, as these models are shifting to the east, more models than not are now showing it shoot the gap. Now, this is obviously a bad thing because it's going to be over warm water as opposed to hitting land before entering the Gulf. But the only thing positive we have on our side right now is the fact that the storm is moving 21 miles an hour. Now, that does change the time frame a little bit. Unfortunately, it puts landfall basically in the middle of the night going into Sunday morning, as projected right around this area as of now, subject to change as we all know. But the middle of the night getting a storm is no bueno. Nobody wants that. It's the worst time to get a storm. We're talking between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning. Again, that may change. The storm's expected to slow down basically just as it's passing through the gap and as it makes its way through the Gulf. That is for a few reasons. One of the main reasons being that there is a jet stream front that is actually being held up just like it did with Tropical Storm Pilar that we were following when dealing with Jose. There's a holdup down here between Texas and Mexico, and there's a front that goes up to the northeast. Now that front is beginning to flatten out. It's almost pivoting. It's being held down here, and the straight line going up to the northeast is beginning to flatten down across the southern states. Now that's going to influence Nate to slow its path a little bit. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen or when it'll start affecting it, but the projection shows that it's supposed to slow down, putting it over warm water longer, and then adding on top of that, it's shooting the gap. Just not always the best news. Now, again, the projections as of right now are Category 1 storm when it makes landfall. One thing I noticed that they pointed out on the Hurricane Center, these numbers are not mine. They put these out at about 15-20 minutes ago. These were the projections as far as wind speed rising between now and landfall. Now, the numbers I'm saying, you got to add 50 to them because that's the current speed of Nate right now, 50-mile-an-hour winds. We have dropped to 996 pressure, and it's moving north-northwest. Now, there is a 40% chance that the winds raise 29 miles an hour higher than they are. There's a 19% chance they raise 35 miles an hour higher. There's a 29% chance that they raise 63 miles an hour faster than they are now. And then there's a 20% chance that the winds may rise as much as 74 miles an hour on top of the 50. That would make it a major hurricane before it makes landfall. Now, again, these are just projections. They're not my projections. These are numbers straight from the Hurricane Center. And the reason for these numbers, I noticed the second they put these out, is once the plots began to show that this thing is shooting the gap, which we've been talking about, guys. We've been talking about this for 2 days, and I projected it to go through this gap because of its interaction with this low system to the south of Florida. Now, this system is beginning to bend down and interact with Nate and becoming part of Nate. Unfortunately, it's giving it more fuel, and that's why we're beginning to see an eye wall form. If you notice in this here, there is one flash frame. I'm sorry about that for people that are susceptible to that, but I had no other way to show this. We can see the eye wall beginning to form. It took a while, but it is happening, and you can see the projection shows it going straight up here, almost dead center in the middle of the gap. That means minimal land interaction, which means it's not going to slow it down. So again, the positive part of this is that it's currently moving 21 miles an hour. That has changed the time frame of when the storm's going to make landfall, and I said it's going to be in the middle of the night going into Sunday. If you remember, 7 a.m. Sunday was about when it was going to make landfall, but because of the speed of the storm, they have shifted that up, meaning that it's going to hit around 1 a.m. To 4 a.m. going into Sunday, which is in the the dead of night, which is not good. I'm sure people are going to be awake anyway. They're not going to sleep through this, so it won't be like they're caught off guard, but anything happening at night is worse than happening in the day, so it's just something to think about. And once again, these are the new warnings and watches. We have a lot more inland as far as the tropical storm watches go. If you remember, a lot of these tropical storm watches extended into this orange area now, which is a hurricane watch zone, but the main area to watch now are these deep purple colors. And my main concern right now, as far as landfall goes, is between Chandler Sound and then I believe it's called Santa Rosa Island in the Panhandle. So again, Florida's not out of the loop because of the Panhandle moving so far west into the Gulf. Most of Florida is obviously out of the path of the storm. Things may change. We just don't know yet. But the main thing I wanted to point out were these hurricane warnings now, which means they're expecting hurricane force winds to hit these areas. They may shift. They may continue shifting east. I want you to be aware of that. You can see in this chart here that Nate is beginning to interact with parts of that system to the south of Florida like we've been talking about. That's also the reason it is shifting east. And if you follow the eye wall, it looks to be going right down the center of the gap. So again, that is why we are worried about this as far as the strengthening goes. And that is why they put out those percentages for wind speed rising. And that is definitely something to keep an eye on, guys. Right here is a rain rate chart as of right now. There is one more updated from this, putting some of these red colors. If you see, red is between 10 and 15 inches of rain. So picture this orange area as red now, and basically this entire yellow area is now orange. So we're talking some areas of the Chancellor Sound. And to be specific about some of the islands there, there's actually an island called Freemason Island. We have the North Islands there. We have New Harbor Island. We have the Chandler Islands, all expected to get between, I would say, 6 and 12 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain, guys. That's why the evacuations are being put in these areas, especially tourists that are in these areas that don't have homes to go to. They are being asked to leave these areas. There are some mandatory evacuations, and then there's some voluntary ones going on. A lot of people, because of the forecast of it being a Category 1 at landfall, are not really making moves about it. I can't say I agree with that. I'm not telling people to go leave their homes. I'm just saying it's time to get prepared for a storm to hit, not only to hit, but to hit in the middle of the night going into Sunday. But again, these are the rain rates. These are subject to change as well. They are shifting more to the east. Expect some of these yellow colors to be to the western part of the Panhandle here as the storm shifts. Now we're going to have a little bit of influence once it gets into the Gulf, which is why we can't heavily rely on these projections just yet. These are why they're putting the warnings out between Louisiana all the way to Florida. It's a wide range of area, but they just don't know exactly what the storm's going to do once it enters the Gulf. It is expected to slow down, which would aid in its strengthening. The longer it's over warm water, the worse off we're going to be as far as landfall. Now, one thing I want to point out is this system in the middle of the Atlantic has gone up to 40% chance of cyclone formation over 5 days, and now it has a 10% chance over 48 hours. So that's something to watch. Some of the projections had it dipping down into the western belt and then being moved towards the Leeward and Lesser Antilles Islands. That would become an issue not only for the Gulf of Mexico, but once again for the east coast of the U.S. We'll keep an eye on that very far out. Main concern is Nate, clearly. Really quick, just to show you the current models, they are all basically in agreement as far as the path goes. I'll run you through the UFC WF first, which is the Euro model. It has it perfectly shooting the gap just like that. It looks like it skips a frame, but it's just based on the speed of the storm, 21 miles an hour. But it goes right in between the gap like we projected it would. Here's the GFS version. Same deal, going right through the gap there. Minimal land interaction, which may aid in the storm strengthening. Here is the Canadian model. Once again, these are almost mirror images of each other, all going through the gap now, not hitting Cancun. There are a couple models showing Cancun. And finally, here is NavGem, also passing right in the dead center of this gap here. So a couple things to look out for, guys, is the fact that it's shooting the gap. We projected that to happen, which will aid in the strength gradually getting bigger as opposed to being stalled out by Cancun. Good news for Cancun, bad news for the U.S. It's hard to do this stuff with weather. More times than none, good news for one person is horrible news for another. So that's just what we're dealing with, guys. It's weather. That's the way it goes. 35 hours as of right now until landfall. Again, projected between the Chandler Islands and the western part of the panhandle of Florida. That may shift as the storm is shifting to the east, but it looks more than likely that it's going to shoot this gap. And if it slows down, that's when we really need to pay attention, guys. That's where those strengths are going to come in, and that is why they put those percentages on those higher wind speeds. We could very well be looking at a major hurricane before landfall. So people thinking that it's just going to be a tropical storm or a Cat 1, it very well may be. If those are our options between tropical storm and a Cat 5, of course we want a tropical storm, but nonetheless, it's nothing to take lightly. This thing may very well become a major hurricane. We still have we have about a day and a half until projected landfall. Again, it may slow down. It may extend that a little bit into the early hours of Sunday or the later early hours. I mean, basically daylight as opposed to the middle of the night. All right, really quick, here is our water vapor chart. I zoomed in as much as possible, but just to show you another version of the eye forming here, it leaves the coast of Honduras, gets into these warm waters, and now is beginning to explode with storms around the eye. We're probably going to see the eye wall begin to form as it's passing this gap, and that's when it's basically just a matter of time. We need to watch every couple hours now to see the differences in strength. Again, you need to watch the pressure. When you see the pressure drop, which is usually what you see first, expect the winds to rise. Pressure drops, winds rise. All right, guys, that's it for now. Main point of this video is to point out that we have hurricane warnings now all the way from the east coast of Louisiana all the way to the panhandle of Florida. That is the latest as of now, guys. I will be back probably within 2 hours, all right? I'll talk to you soon. Thank you all.